socialize or anything like that?
You know, working with Robin is like nothing I've ever done before, and it's tough.
Picture a man who has walked through fire more times than any soul should endure. Pierce Brosnan stands before us today not just as the debonair secret agent who redefined James Bond for an entire generation, but as someone who has faced demons far more terrifying than any fictional villain. His story isn't just one of Hollywood glamour and red carpet triumphs. It's a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure the unthinkable. At 72, this man who once made danger look effortless on the silver screen has confronted losses so profound they would have shattered most people completely. He has watched helplessly as cancer claimed not just one but two of the women he loved most in this world. And now, as shadows lengthen across his twilight years, new challenges emerge that threaten to test his legendary composure one final time. But before we journey into the depths of Pierce Brosnan's most private battles, we want to hear your voice. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate Pierce Brosnan as both an actor and a human being? Your perspective matters deeply to us, and we'll be reading every single comment. Every legend begins somewhere unexpected. For Pierce Brendan Brosnan, that beginning was marked not by fanfare but by silence. The kind of silence that echoes through a child's world when a father simply vanishes without explanation. May 16, 1953. Drogheda, Ireland. A small town where dreams feel as distant as the horizon, where poverty isn't discussed, it's simply lived. Pierce entered the world into circumstances that would have broken a lesser spirit before it even had a chance to form. His father, Thomas Brosnan, was a carpenter whose tools would prove more permanent than his presence. When Pierce was barely old enough to form memories, Thomas made a choice that would haunt his son for decades. He walked away. No dramatic farewell, no tragic accident to explain his absence. Just a door that closed and never opened again. "I have no memory of him," Pierce would later reflect, his voice carrying the weight of a wound that decades couldn't heal. Not his face, not his voice, nothing. He was a ghost before I even knew what ghosts were. His mother, May, became the sole architect of their survival. As a nurse, she worked crushing hours, her hands healing others while her heart ached for the stability she couldn't provide her son. But Ireland in the 1950s offered little mercy to single mothers with ambition. In 1957, when Pierce was just 4 years old, May made the most agonizing decision a mother can face. She left for London, chasing work opportunities that might build them a better life. Just for a little while, as she promised. That little while stretched into 7 endless years. During those 7 years, Pierce became a nomad in his own childhood, drifting between relatives like a leaf carried by wind. First with his grandparents in Nevian, where silence was golden and children were expected to be seen but not heard. Then with an aunt and uncle in Trim, where he learned to read the moods of adults and adjust his presence accordingly. Each household brought its own rules, its own emotional climate, its own reminder that he was temporary. In school, teachers noticed something unusual about the quiet boy with penetrating eyes. There was an intelligence there, yes, but also a distance, as if he was perpetually watching life from behind glass. He would sit by windows, not daydreaming, but searching. Searching for something he couldn't name, something that felt like home but remained just beyond his reach. When May finally returned in 1964 with a new husband named William Carmichael, Pierce was 11 years old. Old enough to remember abandonment, old enough to fear it happening again. William was everything Thomas hadn't been. Patient, present, genuinely caring. He taught Pierce to fish, to repair broken things, to trust that not every man would disappear when life became difficult. Yet for a boy who had learned to guard his heart, even kindness felt dangerous. That same year, William took him to see Goldfinger. In the darkness of that cinema, young Pierce watched Sean Connery embody everything he had never seen in a father figure. Strength, confidence, unshakable resolve. James Bond became more than entertainment. he became a blueprint for the man Pierce dreamed of becoming. Someone who could never be abandoned because he was too strong to need anyone. By 16, that dream had evolved into action. Pierce found himself at London's St. Martin's School of Art, armed with nothing but raw talent and desperate determination. While his classmates discussed weekend plans funded by their parents' comfortable bank accounts, Pierce survived on tea and toast, sketching furiously, studying the works of Francis Bacon and Lucian Freud with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Art wasn't just his passion. It was his escape route from a life that had offered him nothing but uncertainty. The moment. Everything changed. Fate, it seems, has a sense of timing that defies all logic. In 1971, while wandering through London's labyrinthine streets between classes, Pierce stumbled into a small theater workshop. What he found there wasn't what he expected. Not actors rehearsing Shakespeare, but a fire eater practicing his dangerous art. Something about the controlled risk, the performance of fearlessness, spoke to the young man who had spent years perfecting his own act of emotional invincibility. "Can I try that?" he asked, the words tumbling out before his rational mind could stop them. What happened next would rewrite the entire trajectory of his life. The moment Pierce took that flame into his hands, something ignited within him that had nothing to do with fire. The theater troupe saw it immediately: presence, intensity, and the kind of magnetic vulnerability that can't be taught. Within weeks, he had abandoned his paintbrushes for the Drama Centre London, one of the most demanding acting programs in the world. More than half his classmates would quit before graduation. The program was designed to break you down completely before building you back up into something stronger. Pierce not only survived, he thrived. Working menial jobs by day to pay for his training, studying Shakespeare and Chekhov by lamplight, learning mime and circus arts alongside classical technique. He approached acting with the same desperate hunger that had once driven his art, as if his very survival depended on mastering this craft. And perhaps it did. Acting gave him something he'd never had: the ability to become someone else entirely, to inhabit lives where abandonment wasn't possible because the story was already written. On stage, he could be the hero, the lover, the man who never got left behind. The long road to stardom's success, when it finally came, arrived in fragments rather than fanfare. Pierce's first professional role in 1976 was in Wait Until Dark, a psychological thriller where he played a menacing figure lurking in the shadows. It was fitting somehow. He had spent years perfecting the art of watching from the margins, and now he was getting paid for it. The following year brought Tennessee Williams's The Red Devil Battery Sign, a complex, ambitious play that had failed spectacularly in America, but found new life in London through Pierce's magnetic performance. Critics took notice not just of his classical good looks, but of the emotional depth he brought to every scene, a gravitas that seemed to come from lived experience rather than acting technique. Film work trickled in slowly. His first movie role in 1980 earned him exactly £50 for less than 30 seconds on screen, with Elizabeth Taylor in The Mirror Cracked. That same year, he appeared alongside Helen Mirren and Bob Hoskins in The Long Good Friday. Again, a small role, but in a film that would eventually be recognized as a masterpiece of British cinema. He was building momentum the hard way, role by role, audition by audition, proving himself worthy of slightly bigger opportunities each time. But Pierce Brosnan was never someone who believed in shortcuts. He had learned too early in life that anything worth having required patience, persistence, and the willingness to endure rejection without losing faith in the ultimate goal. Then, in 1982, destiny knocked with a force that would reshape everything. The role that changed everything. NBC was developing a new detective series called Remington Steele. The premise was clever: a female private investigator who invented a mysterious male partner to legitimize her business in the eyes of clients who wouldn't take a woman seriously. When a charming con man assumed the fictional identity, comedy and chemistry ensued. Pierce auditioned for a minor background role. Instead, he walked out with the lead. At 29, he was virtually unknown in America, possessing neither the rugged masculinity typically associated with television detectives, nor the polished American accent the role had originally demanded. But something about his presence, that unique combination of vulnerability and strength forged in his difficult childhood, made the character his own from the moment he stepped on set. When Remington Steele premiered on October 1st, 1982, it drew 15.6 million viewers. The show would eventually air in over 80 countries, making Pierce Brosnan a household name and, almost immediately, the subject of intense speculation about his future. Critics and fans began whispering the same refrain: "He's the next James Bond." It was a label that would follow him for more than a decade, bringing both opportunity and frustration in equal measure. Being considered for Bond was the ultimate compliment for any British actor, but it also created a strange kind of pressure. The weight of expectation for a role that remained tantalizingly out of reach. By 1983, those whispers had reached the right ears. Albert "Cubby" Broccoli, the legendary producer behind the James Bond franchise, encountered Pierce on the set of For Your Eyes Only, where Pierce's wife, actress Cassandra Harris, had a supporting role. Watching Pierce move through the world with natural elegance and quiet confidence, Broccoli made a comment that would haunt and inspire Pierce for years. "If he can act, he's my guy." The pieces seemed to align perfectly. Roger Moore was considering retirement from the role that had defined his career, and Pierce Brosnan appeared to be the ideal successor. But timing, as it often does, had other plans. Moore was persuaded to return for one more film with an offer too generous to refuse, and Pierce's first opportunity as 007 slipped away. 3 years later, history repeated itself with even more cruel precision. In 1986, Remington Steele was officially canceled, freeing Pierce just as the Bond producers were ready to make their move. Negotiations began in earnest. Screen tests were conducted. The role seemed to be his at last. Then, NBC, recognizing the value of their leading man now that Hollywood was courting him, made an unprecedented decision. They revived Remington Steele for another season. Pierce, bound by ironclad contracts, watched helplessly as the role of James Bond went to Timothy Dalton, a friend and fellow actor who understood both Pierce's talent and his disappointment. In public, Pierce maintained the gracious professionalism that would become his trademark. In private, the disappointment cut deeper than he allowed anyone to see. For 8 years, what fans would later call the lost Bond years, he continued working steadily, taking roles in spy thrillers like The Fourth Protocol, atmospheric dramas like Nomads, and even appearing in playful Diet Coke commercials that winked at the role that continued to elude him. But perseverance, Pierce had learned in childhood, was sometimes the only currency that mattered. And in 1994, the phone finally rang with the call that would change everything. When Pierce Brosnan finally became James Bond, it wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a resurrection. The franchise was struggling, the studio was nervous, and the entire future of 007 hung in the balance. If GoldenEye failed, James Bond might have died with it. Pierce didn't just succeed, he redefined what Bond could be for a new generation. GoldenEye earned $353 million worldwide, proving that the character could evolve while maintaining his essential appeal. Pierce brought something to the role that his predecessors hadn't: a vulnerability beneath the sophistication, a sense that this man's confidence had been earned through genuine struggle. He performed most of his own stunts, including a breathtaking 220-meter bungee jump from the Verzasca Dam in Switzerland, a leap so dangerous that insurance companies initially refused to cover it. That willingness to put himself at genuine risk wasn't just professional dedication. It was the same fearlessness that had driven him to try fire eating as a young man, the same refusal to accept limitations that had carried him through years of rejection and disappointment. 3 more Bond films followed. Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and Die Another Day. Together they grossed over $1.2 billion worldwide, making Pierce the definitive James Bond for millions of fans. Even Steven Spielberg's offer to play Indiana Jones couldn't tempt him away from the role he had fought so long to claim. But success, particularly the kind that comes after extended struggle, can be fragile in ways that aren't immediately apparent. And in 2004, while filming in the Bahamas and riding the highest wave of his career, Pierce received a phone call that would shatter everything he thought he had secured. The call that ended everything. The conversation lasted 47 seconds. No preamble, no discussion, no acknowledgement of the years of service or the billions of dollars earned. Just a voice on the other end saying, "You were a great James Bond. Thank you very much. Goodbye." The line went dead, and with it, the chapter of Pierce's life that had defined him for a decade. What made the betrayal particularly cruel wasn't just the abrupt dismissal. It was learning afterward that producers had been secretly auditioning his replacement for 2 years, while allowing him to believe his future as Bond was secure. The trust he had placed in the people he considered partners had been systematically violated while he remained loyal, professional, and completely unaware. The aftermath was swift and merciless. 3 major film deals evaporated overnight. His asking price plummeted from $12 million to $3 million as studios began labeling him too Bond. The very success that had made him a star now made him unemployable for other roles. He was forced to let go of 12 loyal staff members, people who had become family during his years at the peak of Hollywood's pyramid. This wasn't just professional disappointment, it was a form of identity theft. Pierce had spent years becoming James Bond, not just in public perception, but in his own understanding of who he was and what he offered the world. To have that stripped away without ceremony or respect felt like losing himself. His children later recalled finding him in tears when the first trailer for Casino Royale was released, featuring Daniel Craig as the new 007. It wasn't jealousy, it was grief. The kind of grief that comes when you see someone else inhabiting the life you built and realize it's gone forever. The love that anchored him. Yet even in the depths of professional despair, Pierce had something that no studio executive could take away. The love of an extraordinary woman who had seen him at his most vulnerable and chosen to stay. He met Keely Shea Smith in 1994 at a beach party in Cabo San Lucas. At the time, she was an accomplished journalist and environmental activist, unimpressed by Hollywood glamour and genuinely interested in the man behind the image. Pierce wasn't looking for romance. He was still carrying wounds from his past that felt too deep to heal. But something about Keely's warmth and authenticity broke through his carefully constructed defenses. Their relationship developed slowly, built on genuine friendship and shared values rather than the superficial attraction that characterized so many celebrity couplings. Keely saw not the suave secret agent or the rising movie star, but a man who still carried silences too heavy to name. And crucially, she didn't try to fix those silences or fill them with false cheer. She simply made space for them, creating a relationship where his grief could exist without defining everything else. When they married in 2001 in a beautiful ceremony at an 800-year-old Irish abbey, it represented more than a union between two people. It was Pierce's declaration that despite everything he had lost, love still had a place in his life. Together, they would have 2 sons, Dylan and Paris, children who would know their father not as James Bond, but as a man who read bedtime stories, attended school plays, and showed up for every moment that mattered. But even as Pierce was building this new chapter of happiness, the past was preparing to deliver its most devastating blow yet. The disease that wouldn't let go. Pierce had believed that losing Cassandra was the deepest wound any soul could bear. He was wrong. In 2013, 22 years after ovarian cancer had claimed his first wife, the same merciless disease returned. This time, it came for Charlotte, Cassandra's daughter whom Pierce had raised as his own from the time she was a teenager. Charlotte was radiant, resilient, filled with the same grace that had defined her mother. She carried Cassandra's kindness in her smile, her strength in the way she faced adversity, and hidden within her DNA, the same fatal shadow that had already claimed so much from their family. The diagnosis came when Charlotte was 40, close to the same age her mother had been when the symptoms first appeared. For Pierce, the news didn't bring shock. It brought a suffocating recognition. He knew this rhythm too intimately. The quiet before devastation, the careful choreography of hope and fear that would define the months ahead. Charlotte fought with the same dignity her mother had shown. For 3 years, she endured surgeries, chemotherapy, and the particular purgatory of waiting rooms filled with sanitized hope and barely contained despair. Her anchor was her children, Isabella, 15, and Lucas, 8, who watched their mother fade with the same bewildered courage that Charlotte herself had shown 2 decades earlier. The cruelest detail was the precision of history's repetition. Charlotte died at 41, just as her mother had died at 43. Lucas was 8, the same age Sean had been when he lost Cassandra. Isabella was 15, the same age Charlotte had been when her mother's illness was first revealed. It was as if grief had a blueprint, returning to carve the same wounds at the same ages with surgical accuracy. In June 2013, knowing that time was running out, Charlotte made a choice that embodied everything beautiful and heartbreaking about the human spirit. Despite her failing strength, despite the cancer that was claiming her body piece by piece, she put on a white dress and married Alex, the man who had stood by her through every treatment, every sleepless night, every moment when hope seemed impossible. 2 weeks later, she was gone. The weight of survival. Standing at Charlotte's funeral, Pierce experienced a kind of grief that had no precedent in human language. To lose a spouse is devastating. To lose a child is unnatural. To lose both to the same disease feels like cosmic cruelty. The symmetry was too perfect, too carefully orchestrated by fate to feel anything but deliberate. In 2014, speaking at a Stand Up to Cancer fundraiser, Pierce found words for the unbearable. I held the generous, strong, beautiful hand of my first wife, Cassie, as ovarian cancer took her life much too soon. And just last year, I held the hand of my funny, wonderful daughter, Charlotte, before she too died from this wretched inherited disease. The audience fell silent. There was nothing to add to that kind of truth. No comfort adequate to that level of loss. Some grief doesn't fade or soften. It becomes part of your skeleton, as permanent and structural as bone. Yet somehow, impossibly, Pierce continued. Not because he was particularly strong or especially resilient, but because he had 2 young sons who needed him to keep showing up, a wife who had been his anchor through every storm, and grandchildren who deserved to know that love could outlast even the most devastating losses. The art of moving forward today, at 72, Pierce Brosnan has built a life that honors both his losses and his capacity for joy. He and Keely divide their time between a coastal home in Malibu and their longtime retreat in Kauai, Hawaii. Places where the horizon stretches endlessly, where the sound of waves provides a natural meditation, where privacy is sacred and peace is possible. His mornings often begin with coffee shared with Keely on the terrace, followed by barefoot walks along the shore. The salt air has a way of softening even the hardest memories, and Pierce has learned to find solace in small rituals that connect him to the present moment. Family remains the center of his universe. Dylan and Paris are forging their own creative paths in music and the arts, carrying their father's artistic sensibility into the next generation. He remains a devoted grandfather to Charlotte's children, Isabella and Lucas, ensuring that their mother's memory lives on not through sadness, but through the stories of her courage, her laughter, and her unshakable love. Creatively, Pierce has returned to his first passion, painting. What began as therapy during Cassandra's illness has evolved into a serious artistic practice. His abstract works, rich with color and emotional depth, have been exhibited in galleries and auctioned for charitable causes. In many ways, he has come full circle to the young man who once survived on tea and toast while pursuing his dreams at Saint Montmartre and His approach to health is mindful and grateful. He follows a diet rich in fresh produce and seafood, exercises regularly through swimming and long walks, and practices moderation in all things. His goal isn't to fight aging, but to embrace it with dignity while maintaining the energy needed for the people and causes that matter most. As a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador and advocate for environmental protection, Pierce has transformed his platform into a force for positive change. With Keeley, he supports organizations like Greenpeace and the Natural Resources Defense Council, fighting for clean oceans and climate justice with the same determination he once brought to perfecting a Bond performance. Cancer research and awareness remain deeply personal missions. Through fundraising, public speaking, and private contributions, he continues to fight the disease that claimed both Cassandra and Charlotte. It's not about defeating death, it's about giving other families more time than his own was granted. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about Pierce Brosnan's journey isn't his success or his talent, or even his extraordinary capacity for survival. It's his refusal to let tragedy define him completely. He carries his losses not as burdens that weigh him down, but as proof of how deeply he is loved and been loved in return. When people ask how he has managed to keep going after losing so much, his answer is characteristically simple. Life has to go on. And if it does, you better find something worth living for. For Pierce, that something is no longer about escaping danger on movie sets or embodying fantasies of invincibility. It's about confronting the real dangers that threaten our planet, our families, and our shared future. It's about using whatever time remains to create beauty, support causes that matter, and love without reservation, despite knowing that love always comes with the risk of loss. His story reminds us that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, again and again, even when the ground feels unstable beneath your feet. It's about choosing hope over despair, action over paralysis, love over fear, even when every rational part of your mind argues against such choices. Pierce Brosnan at 72 is not the unshakable spy who could charm his way out of any predicament. He's something more impressive, a man who has been broken by life and rebuilt himself, not as someone harder or more cynical, but as someone more compassionate, more committed to using whatever influence and resources he possesses in service of others. The final chapters of Pierce Brosnan's life are still being written. There are scripts awaiting his consideration, paintings in progress, family milestones to celebrate, and causes that need champions. While his days of death-defying stunts may be behind him, his willingness to take meaningful risks, emotional, creative, and spiritual, remains undiminished. His legacy will ultimately be measured not by box office receipts or critical acclaim, but by the resilience he modeled in the face of unthinkable loss and the way he transformed that resilience into art, advocacy, and love. He has shown us that even the hardest beginnings can lead to profound endings, that even the deepest grief can coexist with authentic joy, and that even the most private struggles can become sources of public inspiration. In a world that often celebrates superficial success and temporary achievements, Pierce Brosnan's life stands as a testament to deeper values: the courage to love fully despite the risk of loss, the commitment to keep creating even when your heart is broken, and the faith that meaning can be found in the most unexpected places. His journey reminds us that heroism isn't found in the absence of vulnerability, but in the presence of authentic humanity. The man who once made audiences believe in the fantasy of invincibility has given us something far more valuable: proof that real strength comes not from avoiding life's hardest moments, but from walking through them with grace, dignity, and an unshakable commitment to hope. As we look at Pierce Brosnan today, grandfather, artist, activist, survivor, we see not just a man who happened to play James Bond, but someone who embodies the best of what it means to be human. He has faced losses that would destroy most people and emerged not unscathed, but undefeated. He has taken the raw material of tragedy and transformed it into something that serves others. His story isn't over. At 72, he continues to surprise us, to challenge our assumptions about aging and relevance, to demonstrate that the most meaningful chapters of a life often come after the applause has faded and the real work begins. Which part of Pierce Brosnan's extraordinary journey resonates most deeply with you? Is it his resilience in the face of professional betrayal, his grace through unimaginable personal loss, or his commitment to using his platform for positive change? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective adds richness to this ongoing conversation about what it means to live a life of purpose and authenticity. If this story has moved you, consider sharing it with someone who might need a reminder that hope can survive anything, that love can outlast loss, and that even in our darkest moments, the possibility for renewal remains. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is simply witness each other's capacity for resilience and let that witnessing become a source of strength for our own journey forward.